The first thing, I guess, to both of you, it's a show with 40 years of archive. There's been several retrospectives in the past. Where did you start? I mean, how did you decide an angle of how you would start to negotiate such a huge wealth of material?
Thank you. So we're very, very sad that my producing partner, Tom Broker, couldn't be here tonight. But Tom is the costume designer on Saturday Night Live for the last 20 years. You saw him in the film. And this film wouldn't have been possible without Tom. And Tom and I had a conversation about a year ago. And we decided that we wanted to do something just a little different than the retrospectives, to your point. And thought, how can we just kind of get our arms around, and find a way to address 40 years of archival footage, not to mention 50 interviews and 130 new hours of footage that we shot. And it was really just about how can we take the conversation to a different place. And so we thought it might be an interesting notion to explore the idea that you can actually get a lot more information about a culture in a particular country through satirical comedy than you can through traditional media. It's just this way of looking at, you get a texture and a flavor that you wouldn't get otherwise. So that's how we decided to base the film. And Bao, as the director, had a big job there, basically trying to find out how we're going to carve that out. And it really became just like these staccato moments in history, things that were important to America that happened, and then Saturday Night Live's response to them. So that was how we sort of organized the timeline.
And Bao, presumably you watched 40 years of Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah, it was a bit tough. I mean, we had a lot of different producers kind of combing through all the episodes, but I just had to, everyone has their own experience with SNL and their own, different upbringing watching it. And for me, like, when I was making the film, I was just thinking about, like, how did I get introduced to SNL? And it was kind of sneaking out of my bedroom when I was 9, and my parents were, I came from an Vietnamese immigrant household, so the only thing that they would actually let me watch was the news. And I was like, this is a bad way to learn about America, is watch the news in, the late 80s, early 90s. I was like,
a little serious.
Yeah, a bit serious. So, SNL was kind of my portal into American culture and political culture. And I think for a lot of international audiences, the UK included, that sometimes that's how you learn about America. So, with that in mind, watching all these episodes, that was how we decided to choose different sketches and talk to different cast members.
Jay, what were your sort of formative experiences with SNL when you were when you watched it?
Pretty similar, actually, although I am a bit older than Bao, but but it was the same kind of thing. I mean, I grew up with it, so I actually don't remember a time in my life growing up as an American in California with a family that was very TV-centric. I don't remember a time not watching Saturday Night Live. So we sort of approached it with that angle that for Americans of these generations, it's just woven into our DNA as a part of our culture. And so that's kind of a big piece that inspired us. I mentioned at the top of the Q&A, Mr. Tom Broker, the costume designer on Saturday Night Live for the last 20 years. He's a very close relationship with Lorne Michaels. Lorne places a great deal of trust and admiration in Tom and his work. And it was through Tom that we gained access. So this is actually the first time in the 40-year history of the show that Lorne allowed an outside filmmaking crew to come in and do something autonomously. And that was entirely because of Tom. So Tom and I as a duo came in and pitched it to Lorne, and I was sort of the +1 producer lady, but it was really all about Tom. And it was pretty amazing. We made a reference at the early days that we were kind of like a Navy SEAL team, like infiltrating Saturday Night Live. And we had this Noah's Ark rule that never more than 2 of us could be on the floor at any given time, so we didn't look like a group of bankers coming in and invading this amazing show. So Bao is just a tremendous director, but he's also a tremendous shooter. And it was him and a red camera just sort of like lurking in the rafters and disappearing. We often lost him. We're like, where's Bao? Which was kind of the idea, so that we could not disrupt what we were trying to cover. So that's how we got the access. And then our amazing, amazing talent producer, Miss Sarah Cowperthwaite, who's here in the audience and is phenomenal. She actually booked all 50 of the people that we interviewed, which I know kind of goes fast. You can't even realize that there's that many people. But, I mean, including Vice President Al Gore. I mean, she's no joke. So she made that happen. And not only did she have the complications of booking all of these people, but also scheduling them at Studio 8H, a live television studio, while shooting Saturday Night Live, and like working us into the to the shoot week. So it was challenging. As to your question about the UK, we are actually working on that. So NBC International Studios, and we are in a discussion about that very thing. So keep your eyes peeled. It's coming.
I mean, I think, Lauren says that the show tries to be nonpartisan, and I, if Obama's going to offer to be on the show and be made fun of, then I think they should take that opportunity. I think it adds a little legitimacy that the idea that the politicians are willing to kind of, someone from Sarah Palin to Obama, kind of, it's all over the political spectrum. It's not just only, Hillary Clinton will be on the show, but hopefully Donald Trump will be on the show next and things like that. I think it's kind of a wide-ranging way to kind of look at political culture in America and not try to pigeonhole it as a liberal show or a conservative show. Well, as you saw there was a little bit about Frank Rich talking about the Smothers Brothers, which, they kind of did political comedy a bit during the Vietnam War, but then they were taken off the air. So in terms of mainstream television shows that were on broadcast television, I think, or Saturday Night Live was definitely one of the first, and that's why, it was so different from everything that was coming out at the time. Especially, there were variety shows and like Donnie and Marie and things that were very, very different from what you saw with the original cast.
And there were satirical comedy elements in the culture, National Lampoon, Second City. There was a lot of that, but it wasn't broadcast. So sort of the revolutionary component of Saturday Night Live was that in 1975, that was completely unexpected and different for the American culture. It was the first time it was really broadcast, over a broad audience. Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. It's an excellent question, and believe me, we've talked about that quite a bit. We all have different sort of takes on it. I think we all agree conceptually. My personal take on it is that what Saturday Night Live does so beautifully is it honors this tradition and this legacy and this heritage, which we as Americans are not actually very good at. You as Brits are. But there's this heritage and this legacy that's honored over 40 years, and there's this ode to the days of old, and there's all these little things that keep the flavor of the show, the cue cards. You met Cue Card Wally. All this old-fashioned stuff that doesn't really make sense logistically, but they still do because it's a part of the culture of the show. And yet at the same time, they balance that with the ability to react in real time right now to current events and then satirize those events every Saturday live, in 2015. So I think it's that sort of combination of this thing that Americans grew up with and have a fondness and a nostalgia for, while at the same time, when things happen in our country, like anything to do with Donald Trump right now, we say, I can't wait to see that on Saturday. What's Saturday Night Live going to do with it? So there's a combination of the two, and I think it's generational. You can sit around with your whole family, and like Jody, the hair expert on the show, said, you can be a 10-year-old child, and you can be a 70-year-old grandma, and the parents and the kids in between, and all have some enjoyment, and that's pretty rare. So there's lots of critiques of the show and lots of parts you won't like, but there's almost always one thing that you will, and I think that's what keeps people coming back. So to me, that's sort of the special factor of Saturday Night Live.
I mean, similar to what Jael was saying, to be able to make this film and have the privilege of documenting an American institution, I was watching 40 years of American history, not just American television history. When you're watching each episode, it's a time capsule of what was going on in America, what was going on in New York City at that time. A lot of it's before I was born, so it was just
a lot.
Yeah, and being able to see how times have changed, but SNL still stayed strong, in tumultuous times and different times of the changes in media, but it's still, a live variety show every Saturday night, and that's saying a lot about the show, seeing how much noise there is in today's media landscape.
Just I guess maybe a final thing. Given that you shot so many interviews and there's so many great people in there, are there any things that you just ultimately had to cut that you really wish you could? And are we going to get a DVD extended director's producer, creative producers cut, anything like that?
We'll do a two-part answer on that. We've been asked that a few times, as you can imagine. I will reiterate, 40 years of archival footage, 130 hours of new shot footage, and 50 interviews. So yeah, there was a few things on the cutting room floor. Yeah, and we are working on some extended interviews and a DVD extra. That's going to take a little time, but we're on it. But yeah, there was a lot of things I think that were painful for us to cut, not to mention a couple of things that we wish we could have shot. And literally just Friday of last week, Bill Murray called our talent producer, Sarah, and said he'd still like to participate in the film. So
that might still happen.
Yeah,
you know, we'll add it on.
He believes
for
it's
him.
possible.